The dust cloud had been visible for miles before Vance realized. It was being kicked up by nothing more than her own exhausted boots trudging toward what looked like civilization on the horizon. And when she finally reached the weathered hiring post on the edge of San Francisco, California in the summer of 1878, she discovered she was the only woman left standing there while a dozen men had already been selected for work that morning. Her throat burned from 3 days of walking after the stagecoach. She had been traveling in broke an axle 50 miles back, and the driver had taken the only horse to ride ahead for help that never came. Grace had waited 2 full days before deciding her fate rested in her own hands, not in the promises of men who forgot about stranded passengers the moment they rode out of sight. Her dark hair hung in tangles beneath a bonnet that had seen better days, and her traveling dress was coated in the kind of dust that told stories of desperation and determination in equal measure. The hiring post was nothing more than a wooden board nailed to a fence post outside a supply station, with various notices pinned haphazardly across its surface. Grace squinted at the sun-faded papers, looking for anything that might offer her work, food, or shelter. Most of the notices were for ranch hands, cattle drivers, and other positions that explicitly stated men only. She felt her stomach clench with familiar frustration as she read through them, her fingers trembling slightly from hunger and exhaustion. Behind her, she heard the sound of boots on the wooden planks of the supply station porch. Grace turned to see a tall man descending the steps with an easy confidence that spoke of someone comfortable in his own skin. He wore typical cowboy attire, his hat pulled low enough to shade his eyes from the brutal afternoon sun, and his weathered face suggested he was somewhere in his late 20s. He carried himself like someone who had earned every scar and callus through honest work rather than inherited privilege. He stopped when he saw her, his gaze taking in her bedraggled appearance without the mockery or pity she had grown accustomed to from men. Instead, there was something else in his expression, something that might have been respect for the simple fact that she was still standing after whatever journey had brought her here. "You looking for work?" he asked, his voice rough but not unkind. Grace straightened her spine, refusing to appear as desperate as she felt. "I am, though it seems most folks around here have particular ideas about what kind of person can do what kind of work." The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "That they do, but I am not most folks." He stepped closer, and Grace could see his eyes were a startling blue, almost gray in the harsh light. "Name is Owen Garrett. I run a ranch about 15 miles north of here, up in the hills where the grass still grows green even in summer. I came to town today looking to hire 3 more hands for the season." "And have you found them?" Grace asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Found 2 this morning. Good men, experienced with cattle and horses. But I still need 1 more, and everyone else worth hiring got picked up by the Robertson outfit an hour ago." Owen tilted his head slightly, studying her with an intensity that made Grace acutely aware of how she must look. "You know anything about ranch work?" "I know how to work harder than most men give me credit for," Grace said, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I grew up on a farm in Missouri, worked it with my father until he died 2 years ago. After that, my brothers decided the land was theirs alone and that I should go make myself useful as someone's wife. I disagreed with their assessment and left. And you ended up in California looking for work at a hiring post," Owen finished for her. "The journey was supposed to be more straightforward than it turned out to be," Grace admitted. "But yes, here I am, standing, still looking, still capable." Owen was quiet for a long moment, and Grace prepared herself for the polite dismissal she had heard so many times before. Instead, he said something that caught her completely off guard. You will do just fine. Grace blinked. I am sorry, what? You will do just fine, Owen repeated, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. I need someone who can work hard, who knows their way around livestock, and is not going to complain about early mornings or late nights. You say you grew up on a farm, and you walked 3 days to get here by the look of things, which means you have got more grit than half the men I interviewed this morning. So, you will do just fine. The job is yours if you want it. Grace felt something loosen in her chest, a knot of tension she had been carrying for so long she had forgotten what it felt like to breathe without it. You are serious. You would hire me just like that, Owen confirmed, though I should be clear about the terms. It is hard work, sunrise to sunset most days. You would be bunking in the main house since we do not have separate quarters, but you would have your own room. Meals provided, wages paid weekly. $40 a month to start, same as the other hands. $40 a month was more than Grace had dared hope for. That seems more than fair. It is what the work is worth, regardless of who does it, Owen said simply. Now, have you eaten today? You look like you could use a proper meal before we head out. Grace's pride warred with her empty stomach and practicality won. I have not eaten since yesterday morning. Owen nodded and gestured toward the supply station. Come on then. We will get some food in you, pick up the supplies I came for, and head back to the ranch. We should make it before dark if we leave within the hour. Inside the supply station, the proprietor raised an eyebrow when Owen walked in with Grace at his side, but he was wise enough not to comment. Owen ordered beef stew and fresh bread for both of them, along with coffee that was strong enough to strip paint, but tasted like heaven to Grace's parched throat. She tried to eat slowly, maintaining some semblance of dignity, but her body betrayed her desperation. Owen had the grace not to comment, instead focusing on his own meal and occasionally pointing out items he needed the proprietor to add to his supply order. As Grace scraped the last of the stew from her bowl, feeling more human than she had in days, Owen leaned back in his chair and said, "Should probably know a bit about what you are walking into. The ranch is called the High Valley, been in my family for about 10 years now. My father started it, but he passed 3 years ago from pneumonia. My mother followed him 6 months later. I have been running it alone since then, with help from hired hands during the busy seasons." No siblings, Grace asked. Had a sister. She married a banker from Sacramento and moved there. We exchange letters at Christmas, and that is about it. Owen's voice held no bitterness, just a matter-of-fact acceptance of how things were. The ranch runs about 500 head of cattle, plus horses we breed and sell. It is good land, with a creek that never runs dry and enough grazing to keep the herd healthy. Hard work, like I said, but honest. Honest work is all I am looking for, Grace said quietly. Owen stood and gathered his hat. Then let us get you there and put you to work. The ride to the High Valley Ranch was accomplished in a wagon loaded with supplies, with Grace sitting beside Owen on the bench seat while he handled the reins. The 2 hands he had hired that morning, a weathered older man named Pete and a younger fellow called Sam, rode horses alongside the wagon. Both men had been surprised when Owen introduced Grace as the 3rd hand he had hired, but neither had said anything beyond polite greetings. Grace suspected they were withholding judgment until they saw whether she could actually do the work. That was fine. She had spent her whole life proving herself to skeptical men. A few more would not make much difference. The landscape changed as they moved inland from San Francisco, the coastal hills giving way to valleys where grass grew thick, despite the summer heat. Owen had not exaggerated when he said his land stayed green. As they climbed higher into the hills, Grace could see how the morning fog would roll in from the ocean and water everything with cool moisture before the sun burned it away. The ranch house came into view as the sun began to sink toward the western horizon, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. It was a solid structure built from timber and stone, larger than Grace had expected, with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Behind it stood a barn, several smaller outbuildings and corrals where horses moved like shadows in the fading light. "Pete and Sam bunk in the smaller house there," Owen said, pointing to a cabin set about 50 yards from the main house. "You will have the room on the east side of the main house, the one that catches the morning sun. It was my sister's room before she left." Grace nodded, taking it all in. It was more than she had hoped for, and that made her nervous. In her experience, things that seemed too good to be true usually were. But as Owen helped her down from the wagon and Pete and Sam began unloading supplies, Grace decided that maybe, just maybe, her luck was finally turning. She had found work with someone who seemed to judge people on their abilities rather than their gender, and she had a roof over her head in country that took her breath away with its rugged beauty. It was enough. For now, it was more than enough. Owen showed Grace to her room after they finished unloading the wagon. It was simple but clean, with a bed, a chest of drawers, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the eastern hills. Someone had clearly maintained the room even though it had been empty for years. There were curtains on the window, a quilt on the bed, and a pitcher of fresh water on the washstand. "Thought you might want to clean up and rest before dinner," Owen said from the doorway. "We eat in about an hour. Kitchen is straight down the hall, you cannot miss it." "Thank you," Grace said, meaning it more than he could possibly know. "For all of this. For taking a chance on me." Owen shrugged. "Did not feel like much of a chance. You either can do the work or you cannot, and we will find out soon enough. But something tells me you will surprise a lot of people around here." After he left, Grace closed the door and leaned against it, allowing herself one moment of pure relief before she stripped off her filthy traveling clothes and washed with the clean water. She had one change of clothes in her small bag, practical work clothes she had stolen from her brothers when she left Missouri. They fit well enough after she had altered them, and they were far more suitable for ranch work than any dress. Looking at herself in the small mirror above the washstand, Grace barely recognized the woman staring back. She was 22 years old but felt ancient sometimes, worn down by constant struggle and rejection. Her face was thinner than it used to be, her cheekbones sharp beneath sun-browned skin. Her dark hair hung wet and tangled past her shoulders, and her gray-green eyes held a wariness that had not been there 2 years ago. But she was still here, still standing, and tomorrow she would prove to Owen Garrett that his faith in her had not been misplaced. Dinner that evening was a simple affair of roasted chicken, potatoes, and vegetables from a garden Grace had noticed behind the house. Owen was a surprisingly good cook, or perhaps her hunger just made everything taste exceptional. Pete and Sam had been invited to join them at the large kitchen table, and the conversation was easy and focused mostly on ranch business. They discussed which pastures needed rotating, which fences needed mending, and how the water situation looked for the rest of the summer. Grace listened more than she spoke, learning the rhythm and priorities of the ranch. When Owen asked her opinion on something, she gave honest answers based on her experience, and he nodded thoughtfully as if her input actually mattered. It was disorienting and wonderful in equal measure. After dinner, Grace insisted on cleaning up while the men went to check on the horses one final time before bed. She washed dishes in water heated on the stove, looking out the kitchen window at the last light fading from the sky. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out, and another answered. The sound made her feel small and insignificant in the best possible way. Just one more creature trying to make her way in this vast and indifferent landscape. She was drying the last plate when Owen returned, his boots loud on the wooden floor. "You did not have to do all that," he said, looking at the clean kitchen with approval. "I wanted to pull my weight," Grace replied. "Besides, you cooked. Seemed only fair." "We rotate cooking duties around here," Owen said. "Tomorrow it is Pete's turn, which means we will be having stew because that is the only thing he knows how to make. But it is good stew, so no one complains." Grace smiled, a real smile that felt strange on her face after so long. "I can cook if you need someone to add variety. Can you now?" Owen leaned against the counter, arms crossed over his chest in a way that made Grace suddenly aware of how broad his shoulders were. "What else can you do that I should know about?" "I can shoot straight, ride well enough, birth a calf or a foal, set a broken bone, and sew a wound closed if needed," Grace said, ticking items off on her fingers. "I can read, write, do figures in my head. I know which plants are useful for medicine and which will kill you. I can play the fiddle, though not particularly well, and I know about 40 different songs to sing to calm restless cattle. Is that enough to start with?" Owen was staring at her with an expression she could not quite read. "Your brothers were fools to let you go." "Their loss is your gain," Grace said lightly, though her throat felt tight. "That it is," Owen agreed softly. "That it is." The first week at the High Valley Ranch passed in a blur of hard physical labor that left Grace exhausted but satisfied in a way she had not felt in years. Owen had assigned her to work with Pete repairing fences on the northern boundary, and the older man had tested her relentlessly for the first 2 days, giving her the hardest tasks and watching to see if she would complain or give up. She did neither. When Pete asked her to dig post holes in rocky soil, she dug until her hands bled and then wrapped them and kept digging. When he told her to ride out and bring back a dozen strays from the far pasture, she was back with all 12 cows before sunset. When a section of fence needed replacing entirely, and Pete suggested they wait for Sam or Owen to help with the heavy lifting, Grace had simply picked up her end of the post and waited for him to grab his. By the 3rd day, Pete stopped testing her and started actually teaching her the specific quirks of the High Valley Ranch, like which gate had a tendency to stick and needed an extra hard shove, or where the best fishing spot on the creek was, or how Owen's father had designed the irrigation system that kept the pastures green all summer. Grace absorbed it all like a sponge, grateful to be learning from someone who had decided she was worth teaching. And when Pete mentioned casually on the 5th day that she was doing fine work, and he was glad Owen had hired her, Grace had to turn away quickly so he would not see how much those simple words meant to her. Owen himself was an enigma that Grace found herself trying to puzzle out during quiet moments. He worked harder than any of them, up before dawn and still checking on things long after everyone else had gone to bed. He was fair in his expectations, pushing everyone to do their best but never asking for more than was reasonable. When he gave instructions, he was clear and direct, but he also listened when his hands had suggestions or concerns. What fascinated Grace most was how he treated her exactly the same as he treated Pete and Sam. There were no special allowances, no condescension, no awkward attempts at chivalry that would have undermined her position. She was a ranch hand who happened to be a woman, and Owen seemed genuinely unconcerned about the difference. Except sometimes, Grace would catch him looking at her with an expression that was not quite neutral, and her heart would do something complicated in her chest. She told herself firmly that she was being foolish, reading things into innocent glances because she had been lonely for too long. Owen Garrett was her employer, nothing more, and she would be wise to remember that. But then he would smile at something she said, or his hand would brush against hers when they were working side by side, and Grace would feel that flutter again in her stomach, and know she was in dangerous territory. The moment she knew she was in real trouble came at the end of her second week on the ranch. They had spent the day moving cattle to a higher pasture. Hard riding that involved a lot of shouting and dust and near misses with stubborn steers who had no interest in going where they were supposed to go. Grace had held her own, working in concert with the others to funnel the herd through gates and around obstacles. And by the time they finished, she was filthy and exhausted and exhilarated. As they rode back toward the ranch house with the sun setting behind them, Owen had pulled up beside her and said, "You did good work today, Grace. Real good work." It was not the compliment itself that undid her, though that was nice enough. It was the way he said her name, like it meant something, like she meant something. And the way he looked at her, with genuine respect and something else she was afraid to name. She had thanked him gruffly and ridden ahead, needing space to collect herself. But that night, lying in her bed and listening to the sounds of the ranch settling down for the night, Grace admitted to herself that she was developing feelings for Owen Garrett that went well beyond appropriate employee gratitude. It was foolish and dangerous, and could jeopardize everything she had worked for. But apparently, her heart did not care about practicality any more than it cared about self-preservation. The summer heat intensified as July gave way to August, and the work on the ranch shifted to focus on preparing for the cattle drive that would take place in September. Grace had never been on a cattle drive before, but Owen assured her she would do fine and began teaching her the specific skills she would need. They spent hours together in the evenings after the day's regular work was done, with Owen explaining the route they would take, the dangers to watch for, and the strategies for keeping a herd moving efficiently. Grace found herself looking forward to these evening sessions more than she should, and not just because of the valuable information Owen shared. There was something intimate about sitting together on the porch as the light faded, their voices low so as not to disturb Pete and Sam in their cabin. Sometimes their conversation would drift away from ranch business entirely, and they would talk about their lives before, their hopes for the future, their philosophies on everything from horse training to the best way to make coffee. Grace learned that Owen had dreamed of being a teacher when he was young, that he loved reading and had a small but carefully curated collection of books in his bedroom. She learned that he played the harmonica, and that he had once traveled as far as Texas helping drive another man's cattle, learning the trade from the ground up. She learned that he was patient, thoughtful, and possessed a quiet sense of humor that could catch her off guard and make her laugh when she least expected it. In return, she found herself telling him things she had never shared with anyone. About how her father had taught her everything he taught her brothers, refusing to let her be limited by her gender. About how devastated she had been when he died, not just from grief, but from the immediate change in how her brothers treated her. About the long journey west and the moments of fear and doubt when she had wondered if she had made a terrible mistake leaving everything familiar behind. "You did not make a mistake," Owen said firmly when she admitted that last part. "You chose freedom over security, and that takes real courage. Your brothers were too blind to see your worth, but that is their failing, not yours." Grace looked at him in the dim light, at the strong line of his jaw and the earnestness in his eyes, and felt something shift inside her chest. It was the moment she knew she was not just attracted to Owen or developing a crush on him. She was falling in love with him, deeply and irrevocably, in a way that would probably break her heart when this job ended and she had to move on. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for giving me a chance when no one else would." "Best decision I ever made," Owen replied, and the way he said it made Grace wonder if maybe, just maybe, she was not alone in what she was feeling. But before she could gather the courage to say something, to test the waters and see if her instincts were correct, Sam came walking up from the barn with news that one of the mares was showing signs of foaling. The moment passed, and Grace told herself it was probably for the best. The foaling went smoothly, a beautiful colt born just after midnight with all of them in attendance to help if needed. Grace assisted Owen directly, following his quiet instructions and marveling at how gentle his hands were for someone so strong. When the colt finally stood on shaky legs and found his mother's milk, Grace was surprised to feel tears prickle her eyes at the simple miracle of it. Owen saw, because of course he did, but he did not comment. He just handed her a clean rag to wipe her face and said, "Gets me every time too." In that moment, Grace knew she was utterly lost. August brought new challenges in the form of a drought that was worse than expected. The creek that ran through the property was lower than Owen had ever seen it, and the grass in the lower pastures was starting to brown despite the irrigation system. They worked long hours moving cattle to the areas with the best grazing, rationing water carefully, and praying for rain that did not come. The heat and stress frayed everyone's tempers except Owen's. He remained steady and calm, making decisions based on experience and careful observation rather than panic. Grace watched how the other men looked to him for leadership and felt a surge of admiration for how he handled the pressure. One evening after a particularly brutal day of work, Grace found Owen standing by the creek, staring down at the thin trickle of water with an expression of deep concern. She approached quietly, not wanting to intrude, but he heard her and turned. "How bad is it?" she asked. "Bad enough," Owen admitted. "If we do not get rain in the next 2 weeks, we will have to make some hard choices about the herd. Might have to sell off more than I planned before the drive, and the prices will not be good this time of year." Grace stood beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "What can I do to help?" Owen looked at her, and there was something raw in his expression that made her breath catch. "You have already helped more than you know. Having someone I can trust completely, someone who works as hard as you do and never complains, that makes everything easier." "You can trust me," Grace said. "With anything." They stood there in the fading light, and Grace felt the air between them change, become charged with possibility. Owen reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, and brushed a strand of hair back from her face with gentle fingers. "Grace," he said, and her name in his voice sounded like a prayer. "I need to tell you something, but I do not want you to feel pressured. You work for me, and I know that puts you in a difficult position." "Tell me anyway," Grace said, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "I have feelings for you," Owen said simply. "Strong feelings that go well beyond employer and employee. You are smart and capable and beautiful, and every day I find myself looking for excuses to be near you. But if you do not feel the same way, or if you need this to stay professional, I will respect that. Your job is secure regardless. You have my word on that." Grace felt dizzy with relief and joy and a kind of terror at taking this leap. "I feel the same way," she confessed. "I tried not to, tried to convince myself it was gratitude or admiration or anything but what it actually is. But I can't keep lying to myself. I have fallen in love with you, Owen." The smile that spread across Owen's face was like sunrise after a long night. "You love me." "I do," Grace said, and saying it aloud felt like freedom. I know it is probably too soon and definitely complicated, but I do." Owen took her hands in his thumbs rubbing gentle circles on her palms. "I love you too, Grace Vance. Think I started falling for you the moment I saw you at that hiring post, looking like you had walked through hell but refusing to quit. You are the strongest person I have ever met, and I want nothing more than to spend my days proving to you that you made the right choice coming here." Grace felt tears spill down her cheeks, but they were good tears, happy tears. "So what do we do now?" "Now," Owen said, pulling her gently into his arms, "we take things one day at a time. We keep working the ranch, preparing for the drive, dealing with this drought. But we do it together, as partners in every sense of the word." Grace wrapped her arms around him, letting herself feel safe for the first time in years. "Together sounds perfect." Owen tilted her chin up and kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise. Grace kissed him back, pouring all her hope and love into the gesture, and when they finally broke apart, the world felt different somehow. Brighter, full of possibility. The rain came 3 days later, a blessed relief that turned the sky gray and the ground muddy and brought the creek back to life. They all worked in the downpour, laughing and whooping with joy as the water soaked through their clothes and washed the dust from the land. Grace caught Owen's eye across the corral and saw her own happiness reflected back at her, and she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Pete and Sam figured out the change in Owen and Grace's relationship without anyone having to tell them. Pete just nodded approvingly when he saw them standing close together, and Sam grinned and said he had known something was brewing for weeks. Neither man seemed bothered by the development, which Grace appreciated more than she could say. As the summer gave way to early fall, Grace and Owen settled into their new dynamic as both work partners and romantic partners. They were careful not to let their personal relationship interfere with ranch operations, but in the evenings after work was done, they would sit together on the porch or walk down by the creek, talking and laughing and learning each other in all the ways that mattered. Owen was patient and kind, never pushing Grace faster than she was comfortable going, but making sure she knew he was committed to building a future with her. He talked about expanding the ranch, about breeding better horses, about all the dreams he had put on hold while he was working alone. Now, with Grace beside him, those dreams felt possible again. Grace found herself imagining a future she had never dared hope for, one where she was not just tolerated or useful but genuinely valued and loved. She imagined winters spent planning for spring, summers full of hard work and satisfaction, falls with cattle drives and the celebration that came with successful sales. She imagined children someday, little ones who would grow up knowing that hard work and determination mattered more than gender or convention. But first, they had to get through the cattle drive. September arrived with cooler temperatures and clear skies, perfect conditions for the journey ahead. Owen had arranged to join up with 2 other small ranchers, combining their herds to make a group large enough to be worth the buyer's attention, but small enough to be managed by their limited crews. They would drive the cattle to the stockyards in Sacramento, a journey of about a week if everything went well. Grace was both excited and nervous about her first cattle drive. She had heard stories about everything that could go wrong, from stampedes to river crossings gone bad to encounters with bandits. But Owen had faith in her abilities, and she was determined not to let him down. The morning they set out, Grace double-checked all her gear and supplies, making sure she had everything she might need. Her horse, a sturdy mare named Rosie that Owen had assigned to her back in July, was in good condition and ready for the journey. Grace had grown fond of the mare over the past months, and Rosie seemed to have accepted her in return, responding quickly to commands and remaining calm in chaotic situations. Owen rode up beside her as the combined herd began to move, 300 head of cattle from their ranch plus another 200 from the other ranchers. "You ready for this?" "As ready as I will ever be," Grace said, trying to project more confidence than she felt. "Just remember what we practiced," Owen said. "Stay aware of the cattle around you, watch for trouble before it starts, and trust your instincts. You will do fine." Grace nodded and took her position on the flank of the herd, focusing on keeping the cattle moving in the right direction and preventing any from breaking away. It was hot, dusty work that required constant attention, but Grace found a rhythm to it that was almost meditative. She worked alongside Pete and Sam and the hands from the other ranches, all of them falling into the practiced coordination required to move such a large group of animals. The first 2 days went smoothly, and Grace began to relax into the routine of the drive. They would rise before dawn, get the herd moving, spend all day in the saddle keeping the cattle together and on course, then make camp in the evening and take turns on night watch. It was exhausting, but there was something deeply satisfying about it too, being part of something bigger than herself. On the third night, Grace took the second watch, circling the bedded down herd slowly on Rosie and singing softly to keep the cattle calm. The stars overhead were brilliant in the clear sky, and the air had that crisp quality that promised fall was truly arriving. She was tired but content, letting her mind wander to thoughts of Owen and their future together. She was so lost in thought that she almost missed the signs of trouble. But years of training from her father kicked in, and she noticed how the cattle were starting to shift restlessly. Their ears pricked forward as if sensing something in the darkness beyond the camp. Grace immediately became more alert, scanning the shadows for whatever had disturbed them. There, at the edge of the firelight's reach, she saw movement. At first, she thought it might be a coyote or some other predator, but then she realized the shape was wrong. It was a man or several men creeping toward the camp on foot, bandits. Grace's heart began to pound, but she kept her head. She turned Rosie casually, as if just continuing her patrol, and rode quickly but quietly back toward where Owen was sleeping. She dismounted and touched his shoulder, and he came awake instantly, hand moving toward his gun. "We have visitors," Grace whispered. At least 3 men on foot approaching from the south. Owen was up immediately, waking Pete and Sam with quiet urgency. Within minutes, they had roused the other hands and positioned themselves defensively around the camp and herd. Grace stayed mounted on Rosie, ready to try to keep the cattle from stampeding if shooting started. The bandits, realizing they had been discovered, abandoned any pretense of stealth. There were 4 of them, and they came in with guns drawn, clearly intending to rob the drovers and steal what cattle they could scatter and round up later. But they had not counted on facing a prepared defense. Owen stepped forward, his rifle held ready but not yet aimed. "You fellows are making a mistake. We have got nothing worth dying for, and I promise you that is what will happen if you do not turn around and leave right now." The leader of the bandits, a wiry man with a scar across his cheek, sneered. "Big talk from a small outfit. Hand over your money and guns and maybe we will let you live." "Not going to happen," Owen said calmly. "Last chance to walk away." The bandit's answer was to raise his gun, but before he could fire, Grace urged Rosie forward between him and Owen, her own rifle coming up smoothly. "I would not do that if I were you." The bandit hesitated, clearly surprised by her intervention, and that moment of hesitation was all Owen needed. He moved sideways, creating a crossfire situation, and Pete and Sam appeared from the shadows with their weapons ready. Faced with much stiffer resistance than they had anticipated, the bandits finally showed some sense. The leader lowered his gun slowly and backed away. "This is not over." "Yeah, it is," Owen said. "And if we see you following us again, we will not give you another chance to leave. Understood?" The bandits retreated into the darkness, and everyone remained on high alert for the rest of the night. But the would-be thieves apparently decided to find easier targets because they never returned. As dawn broke and they prepared to get the herd moving again, Owen pulled Grace aside. "That was quick thinking and brave, putting yourself between me and that gun. But Grace, you could have been killed." "So could you," Grace pointed out. "We are partners, remember? That means I have your back, same as you have mine." Owen looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I do not know what I would do if something happened to you." "Then it is a good thing I am hard to kill," Grace said, trying to lighten the mood, but she reached up and touched his face gently. "I am not going anywhere, Owen. You are stuck with me." He pulled her into a quick embrace, not caring that the other men could see. "That is all I want. You, here, safe." The rest of the cattle drive passed without major incident, though everyone remained more vigilant after the encounter with the bandits. They reached the stockyards in Sacramento on schedule, and Owen negotiated a good price for the cattle, better than he had hoped for given the summer drought. It was enough to see the ranch through the winter with some left over for improvements and expansion. On their last night in Sacramento, before heading back to the ranch, Owen invited Grace to have dinner with him at a proper restaurant, not just trail food cooked over a campfire. Grace wore the one decent dress she owned, and Owen put on a clean shirt and jacket, and they sat across from each other in a dining room with white tablecloths and actual silverware. "This feels strange after months of eating off tin plates," Grace said, smiling at the formality of it all. "Strange but nice," Owen said. He reached across the table and took her hand. "Grace, I know we have not been together long and I know you value your independence, but I need to ask you something and I want you to answer honestly, even if the answer is not what I hope for." Grace felt her heart begin to race. "Okay." Owen took a deep breath. "Will you marry me? Not because it is expected or because of your job or anything like that. Marry me because you want to spend your life with me, because you love me as much as I love you. Be my partner in every way. Help me build the High Valley into something great. Raise children with me if that is what you want. I cannot promise it will always be easy, but I can promise I will never take you for granted, and I will spend every day trying to deserve you." Grace felt tears spring to her eyes, but she was smiling so hard her face hurt. "Yes, yes, Owen, I will marry you. Nothing would make me happier." Owen stood and came around the table, pulling her to her feet and kissing her right there in the middle of the restaurant. Someone nearby applauded, and Grace laughed against Owen's lips, feeling joy bubble up inside her like a spring. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the ranch, with Pete and Sam serving as witnesses and the circuit preacher officiating. Grace wore a new dress that Owen had insisted on buying for her, pale blue with white lace, and she carried wildflowers picked from the pastures that morning. Owen wore his best suit, and when he saw Grace walking toward him across the yard, the look on his face made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. Their vows were traditional but heartfelt, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Owen kissed her with such tenderness that Grace felt her knees go weak. They celebrated with a feast that evening, Pete having roasted a pig and Sam having somehow procured several pies from a bakery in town. A few neighbors came by to offer congratulations, and there was music and dancing under the stars until late into the night. When everyone finally left and Grace and Owen retired to the main house, now truly their home together, Owen carried her over the threshold like something out of a storybook. Grace laughed at the romantic gesture, then stopped laughing when he set her down and kissed her with an intensity that spoke of months of restrained desire finally being allowed free rein. Their wedding night was everything Grace had hoped for and more. Owen was patient and gentle, taking his time to learn what brought her pleasure, and Grace discovered a depth of passion in herself she had not known existed. They came together as equals, giving and taking in turn, and when they finally lay tangled together in the aftermath, Grace felt a completeness she had never experienced before. "I love you," she whispered against Owen's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I love you too," Owen said, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Every day for the rest of our lives I will love you," Grace believed him. The first year of their marriage was full of hard work and small joys. They fell into an easy partnership both on the ranch and in their personal life. Grace continued to work alongside the hired hands, though now she also took on more responsibilities in managing the household and the ranch's finances. She discovered she had a head for numbers and helped Owen reorganize their bookkeeping system in a way that gave them a much clearer picture of their financial health. By the following spring, Grace realized she was pregnant. She told Owen on a morning in late March, after weeks of suspecting but wanting to be sure. His reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He swept her into his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests, and then immediately started worrying about whether she was working too hard and if they needed to hire additional help so she could rest more. "Owen, I am pregnant, not dying," Grace said, amused by his sudden overprotectiveness. "Women have been doing this since the beginning of time while also doing everything else that needs doing." "I know, but you are different," Owen insisted. "You are carrying our child. That is precious." "And I will take reasonable care of myself," Grace promised. "But I am not going to spend the next 6 months sitting in a chair doing nothing. That would drive me mad." They compromised, with Grace continuing to work but avoiding the most physically demanding or dangerous tasks. She focused more on training horses, which she had discovered a real talent for, and on the garden and chickens and other aspects of ranch life that kept her busy without being overly strenuous. As summer arrived and Grace's belly began to swell with obvious pregnancy, she found herself dreaming about the child she carried. Would it be a boy or a girl? Would they have Owen's blue eyes or her gray-green ones? What kind of person would they grow up to be? Owen was similarly fascinated by the changes in Grace's body and the life growing inside her. He would often rest his hand on her belly, feeling for kicks, and talk to the baby about the ranch and the horses and all the things they would do together when the little one was old enough. "What if I am not a good mother?" Grace asked one night as they lay in bed, her fears finally surfacing. "I never knew my own mother. She died when I was born. What if I do not know how to do this?" Owen pulled her close, careful of her belly. "Then you will figure it out, same as you figure out everything else. You are the smartest, most capable person I know, Grace. Our child will be lucky to have you as a mother." "Our child will be lucky to have you as a father," Grace countered. "You are patient and kind and you never give up. Those are good qualities for a parent." "Then together we will be enough," Owen said. "We will make mistakes, probably lots of them, but we will love this child with everything we have, and that will make all the difference." Grace believed him because she had no other choice. And in the quiet moments before sleep claimed her, she would rest her hand over Owen's where it lay on her belly and imagine the three of them together. A family built not on blood alone but on choice and commitment and love. Their son was born on a cool October evening, arriving 2 weeks early but healthy and strong. The labor was long and difficult, with only the local midwife to assist, and there were moments when Grace wondered if she would survive it. But Owen stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand and wiping her face and offering encouragement. And finally, as the sun set outside their bedroom window, their son entered the world with a lusty cry. "He is perfect," Owen said, tears streaming down his face as the midwife placed the baby in Grace's arms. "Grace, you did it. He is perfect." Grace looked down at the tiny red face, the little fists waving in the air, the eyes squeezed shut against the sudden brightness of the world, and felt her heart expand in a way she had not known was possible. This was her son, hers and Owen's. A whole new person who would grow and change and become someone neither of them could yet imagine. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "Welcome to the world. We have been waiting for you." They named him Thomas after Owen's father and called him Tommy for short. He was a good baby, nursing well and sleeping in manageable stretches. And Grace was surprised by how naturally motherhood came to her despite her fears. She learned to decipher Tommy's different cries, to soothe him when he was fussy, to celebrate each tiny milestone like his first smile or the day he discovered his own hands. Owen was a devoted father, taking Tommy with him whenever possible as he went about his work on the ranch. Grace would look out the window and see her husband walking toward the barn with their son strapped to his chest in a sling she had sewn, and her heart would swell with love for both of them. Pete and Sam doted on Tommy shamelessly, competing to see who could make the baby laugh the loudest. Grace teased them about being soft, but secretly she was glad Tommy would grow up surrounded by good men, who would teach him how to be strong and kind in equal measure. The years passed in a blur of seasons and growth. Tommy took his first steps on a spring morning when he was 10 months old, stumbling from Grace to Owen across the kitchen floor with a look of utter determination on his chubby face. He said his first word at a year old, and it was, "Mama," which made Grace cry happy tears. He grew into a bright, curious toddler who wanted to be involved in everything and asked endless questions about how things worked. When Tommy was 2, Grace discovered she was pregnant again. This time she recognized the signs immediately and told Owen right away. He was just as thrilled as he had been the first time, and Tommy seemed excited about the prospect of a sibling even if he did not fully understand what that meant yet. Their daughter was born the following spring, during a rainstorm that turned the world soft and gray. The labor was shorter this time, and when the midwife placed the baby girl in Grace's arms, she marveled at how different this tiny person looked from Tommy had at birth. Where Tommy had been red and wrinkled, his sister was pink and smooth, with a cap of dark hair and delicate features. "She looks like you," Owen said softly, touching the baby's tiny hand with one gentle finger. "She has your nose," Grace replied, smiling through her exhaustion. They named her Sarah, and she was a different kind of baby than Tommy had been. Where he had been placid and easy, Sarah was demanding and particular, wanting things just so and letting everyone know loudly when she was dissatisfied. But she was also quick to smile and laugh, and her sunny disposition between fussy spells made up for the challenges. Tommy was fascinated by his little sister, wanting to help with everything from diaper changes to feeding time. Grace and Owen supervised carefully but encouraged his involvement, teaching him to be gentle and patient. Watching her son carefully hold his sister's bottle or sing to her when she was crying, Grace felt like her heart might burst from happiness. The High Valley Ranch prospered under Grace and Owen's joint management. They expanded gradually, buying adjoining land when it became available, improving their breeding stock, and building a solid reputation for producing quality cattle and horses. Grace's horse training skills became particularly well known in the region, and people started coming from miles around to buy horses she had worked with. They hired more hands as the operation grew, and Grace made sure to judge each applicant on their skills and character, rather than any preconceived notions about what a ranch hand should look like. As a result, the High Valley became known as a place where anyone willing to work hard could find employment, and they attracted some of the best workers in the region. Life was not without challenges. There were droughts and harsh winters, times when money was tight and they had to make difficult decisions about the herd. There were illnesses and injuries, both to the family and the livestock. There were disagreements between Grace and Owen, moments when they saw things differently and had to work through their conflict to find compromise. But through it all, their love remained constant. They had built something strong together, something that could weather storms and celebrate triumphs in equal measure. Every night, no matter how hard the day had been, they would lie together in their bed and talk through everything that had happened, supporting each other and planning for tomorrow. When Tommy was 5 and Sarah was 3, Grace became pregnant again. This pregnancy was harder than the previous two, with more sickness and exhaustion, but the midwife assured her everything was progressing normally. Grace cut back on her ranch work more than she had before, letting Owen and the hands handle more of the physical labor while she focused on the children and the household. Their third child, another son they named James, was born on a hot summer day. He came quickly, almost too quickly, arriving just minutes after the midwife got to the house. He was a big baby, healthy and strong, and he immediately latched on to Nurse with an enthusiasm that made Grace laugh despite her exhaustion. "I think this one is going to keep us busy," Owen said, watching his new son nurse with gusto. "All of them keep us busy," Grace pointed out. "But yes, I think you are right. He already knows what he wants." Tommy and Sarah adapted to the new baby with different levels of enthusiasm. Tommy, now old enough to be a real helper, took his role as oldest child seriously and often entertained Sarah, so she would not bother Grace when she was feeding or changing James. Sarah was initially jealous of the attention James received, but eventually decided he was acceptable as long as he did not touch her toys. Watching her 3 children interact, Grace sometimes had to pinch herself to believe this was really her life. 5 years ago, she had been alone and desperate, standing at a hiring post with no prospects and no hope. Now she had a husband she loved, 3 healthy children, and a home that felt like a true partnership in every sense. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. By the time Tommy was 10, they were running over 1,000 head of cattle and had established themselves as one of the premier horse breeders in Northern California. Grace had trained dozens of horses, each one carrying her reputation out into the world with their new owners. Owen had expanded their land holdings to include prime grazing in multiple valleys, ensuring they could sustain their herd even in drought years. Tommy showed early promise as both a horseman and a cattleman, absorbing everything Owen taught him with the same intensity Grace had once brought to learning ranch work. Sarah, now 8, was more interested in the business side of things, often sitting with Grace as she did the books and asking perceptive questions about profit margins and market trends. James, at 5, was still figuring out his interests, but he showed a natural gift with animals that suggested he might follow in Grace's footsteps as a trainer. Grace and Owen talked sometimes about whether they would have more children, but both felt their family was complete as it was. 3 healthy, bright children seemed like more than they had any right to ask for, and with Grace now in her early 30s, she was content to focus her energy on raising the children they had rather than adding to their family. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The children grew and changed, each year bringing new challenges and joys. They hired a tutor to come to the ranch 3 times a week, ensuring all 3 children learned to read, write, and do mathematics. Grace supplemented this formal education with practical knowledge, teaching them about plants and weather and the 100 small skills that made the difference between surviving and thriving in this landscape. Owen taught them about animal husbandry, about the business of ranching, about integrity and hard work and treating people fairly. Together, Grace and Owen created an environment where their children could flourish, where they were encouraged to question and explore and become their own people. The years passed with surprising speed. Tommy grew into a tall, serious young man who shared his father's steadiness and his mother's determination. Sarah became a force of nature, smart and opinionated and utterly sure of her own capabilities. James developed into a quiet but observant boy who could gentle the wildest horse and read animal behavior like some people read books. By the time Tommy was 17, he was running much of the day-to-day ranch operations alongside Owen, making decisions and managing the hands with an authority that belied his age. Sarah, at 15, had taken over all the ranch bookkeeping and was proving to have an even better head for business than Grace. James, at 12, was training horses that sold for premium prices throughout the region. Grace looked at her children and saw young adults emerging, each one unique but all of them carrying the values she and Owen had tried to instill. They were good people, kind and hardworking and honest, and she was proud of them in a way that made her throat tight with emotion. One evening in early fall, after the children had gone to bed and Grace and Owen sat on their porch watching the stars, Owen said, "Do you ever think about that day at the hiring post, when you were the last woman standing and I told you that you would do just fine?" Grace smiled at the memory. "All the time. That was the day my whole life changed." "Mine too," Owen said. "I thought I was just hiring a ranch hand. Instead, I found everything I did not even know I was looking for: a partner, a wife, a mother for my children, someone who makes every day better just by being in it." "I was so scared that day," Grace admitted. "Scared and desperate and trying so hard not to show it. And then you looked at me and saw something worth taking a chance on. You gave me hope when I had almost none left." Owen reached over and took her hand, his thumb rubbing familiar circles on her palm. "Best decision I ever made. Building this life with you, raising our children together, growing old beside you. Grace, you are my everything." Grace leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him beside her. "And you are mine. We have built something good here, Owen, something worth all the hard work and sacrifice." "We have," Owen agreed, "and it is not finished yet. We have got years ahead of us still, watching our children build their own lives, maybe grandchildren someday, new challenges and adventures." "Bring them on," Grace said. "As long as I have you beside me, I can handle anything." They sat in comfortable silence, 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built a love that had stood the test of time. The ranch spread out before them, dark fields and distant hills under an endless sky, everything they had worked for and everything they had created together. Inside the house, their children slept peacefully, safe and loved and full of promise. The cattle grazed in the pastures, the horses rested in the barn, and the land itself seemed to breathe with contentment. The High Valley Ranch was more than just a business or a piece of property. It was a testament to what 2 people could accomplish when they believed in each other and refused to give up. Grace thought about that younger version of herself, standing dusty and desperate at a hiring post, and wished she could tell her that everything would turn out better than she could possibly imagine. That the cowboy who said she would do just fine would become the love of her life. That the hard work and uncertainty would lead to a family and a home and a legacy that would last long after they were gone. But that younger Grace had taken the leap anyway, trusting in nothing but her own determination and a stranger's willingness to give her a chance. And that courage had made all the difference. As the night deepened and the stars wheeled overhead, Grace and Owen finally rose and went inside, hand in hand as always. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new joys, but they would face them together, as they had faced everything else for the past 20 years. And that was more than enough. That was everything. The years continued to unfold with their mixture of ordinary days and extraordinary moments. Tommy married at 21, choosing a smart young woman from a neighboring ranch who shared his passion for cattle breeding. The wedding was held at the High Valley, with seemingly half the county in attendance, and Grace cried happy tears as she watched her oldest son pledge his life to his bride. Sarah left for San Francisco at 18 to attend a business college, one of the first women accepted into the program. She wrote home weekly, her letters full of excitement about her studies and the bustling city life. Grace and Owen were proud of her ambition, even as they missed her presence on the ranch. James stayed close to home, content to work with the horses and help Owen manage the growing operation. He was courting a girl from town, a gentle soul who loved animals as much as he did, and Grace suspected another wedding would be in their future before long. As Grace and Owen moved through their 40s and into their 50s, they began to think about succession and the ranch's future. Tommy was the obvious choice to eventually take over the main operations, but they wanted to ensure all 3 children had a stake in what they had built. With Sarah's help, they restructured the ranch as a family partnership, dividing ownership equally among the 3 children while retaining final decision-making authority as long as either Grace or Owen was alive. Grandchildren began to arrive, first Tommy's son and daughter, then James's 3 boys. Sarah eventually returned from San Francisco with a law degree and a husband who was happy to settle into ranch life, and she gave birth to twin girls who kept everyone on their toes. The ranch house that had once seemed almost too large now felt full and alive with the sounds of children playing and young parents managing the chaos of raising the next generation. Grace loved being a grandmother, loved the opportunity to spoil the little ones, and then hand them back to their parents when they got cranky. She taught them the same lessons her father had taught her, and that she had passed on to her own children, about the land and the animals, and the importance of doing honest work with your own hands. Owen was an indulgent grandfather, always good for a ride on his shoulders or a story about the old days. Grace would watch him with their grandchildren and fall in love with him all over again, seeing the patient kindness he showed to every small person who climbed into his lap or tugged on his sleeve. When Grace was 55, Owen surprised her with a trip to San Francisco to celebrate their anniversary. They left the ranch in Tommy's capable hands and spent a week in the city where Grace had first arrived in California so many years ago. They stayed in a fine hotel, ate at expensive restaurants, saw a theatrical performance, and walked along the waterfront watching ships come and go. On their last evening there, Owen took Grace to the spot where the old hiring post had once stood. It was long gone now, replaced by newer buildings as the city grew and changed, but they both remembered exactly where it had been. "I stood right here," Grace said, "thinking my life was over before it had really begun. I had no money, no prospects, no hope. And then you walked up and everything changed." "I stood right there," Owen said, pointing to where the supply station had been, wondering if I would find anyone worth hiring. I had almost given up when I saw you. You looked like you had been through hell, but you were still standing, still fighting. I knew right then that you were special. You said I would do just fine, Grace remembered. You did better than fine, Owen corrected. You exceeded every expectation, defied every limitation anyone tried to put on you, and built something extraordinary. I am so damn proud of you, Grace. Proud to be your husband, proud of the family we created, proud of everything we accomplished together. Grace kissed him there on the street, not caring who saw. I love you, Owen Garrett. Every day for 30 years I have loved you more than the day before. You gave me a chance when no one else would, and you gave me a life beyond my wildest dreams. They stood together as the sun set over the city, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something that would last long after they were gone. Around them, San Francisco bustled with activity, but Grace and Owen were in their own world, remembering the past and grateful for every moment that had led them here. When they returned to the high valley, Grace felt renewed and ready for whatever years remained to them. She and Owen began to gradually step back from the daily operations of the ranch, trusting the next generation to carry on what they had started. It was not always easy to let go, but they had raised their children well, and it was time to trust in that. Grace still trained a few horses each year, unwilling to give up the work that brought her such satisfaction. Owen still consulted on major decisions and taught his grandchildren everything he knew about ranching. But more and more, they found time for each other, for quiet evenings on the porch and lazy mornings in bed, and all the small intimacies that made a marriage rich and full. As they moved into their 60s, their health remained good, though Owen developed arthritis in his hands and Grace found that her knees sometimes protested after long days on her feet. They adapted, as they had always adapted, finding new ways to contribute even as their bodies reminded them they were not young anymore. Tommy ran the ranch with confidence and skill. Sarah managed the business and legal aspects from her office in the main house, and James oversaw the horse breeding program that was now known throughout California. The grandchildren were growing up strong and capable, each one showing promise in their own way. Grace and Owen watched it all with satisfaction, knowing that what they had built would continue long after they were gone. The High Valley Ranch was not just their legacy. It was a living thing that would grow and change with each generation. But the core values of hard work, integrity, and treating people fairly would remain constant. On Grace's 65th birthday, the whole family gathered for a celebration. 3 children, their spouses, and 8 grandchildren ranging from infants to teenagers filled the house with noise and laughter. Grace looked around the crowded table at dinner and felt overwhelmed with gratitude for the abundance of her life. Owen stood to give a toast, his voice still strong despite his years. To my wife, Grace. 65 years ago she came into this world, and 32 years ago she walked into my life. She was the last woman standing at the hiring post that day, and when I said she would do just fine, I had no idea how much of an understatement that was. She became my partner, my love, the mother of my children, and the heart of this ranch. Everything good in my life traces back to the moment I met her. Happy birthday, my love. May we have many more years together. Everyone raised their glasses, and Grace had to wipe away tears before she could drink. Later that night, after everyone had gone home or to bed, she and Owen sat on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. "You have any regrets?" Grace asked, a question she had never voiced before. Owen considered it carefully before answering. "No. I wish my parents had lived long enough to meet you and the children, and there are small things I might have done differently here and there. But regrets? No. Every choice I made led me to this life, to you, to all of it. How could I regret any of that? I feel the same way, Grace said. Even the hard times, even the moments when I thought I could not go on, they all led me here. To you, to this family, to this place. I would not change a single thing. They sat in comfortable silence. Two people who had spent more than 3 decades building a life together and had succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. The ranch spread out before them, dark and quiet under a blanket of stars, and Grace felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. This was home. This was family. This was love that had endured through every challenge and grown stronger with every passing year. And when her time came to leave this world, Grace knew she would go without regret, satisfied that she had lived fully and loved deeply and left the world better than she had found it. But that time was not yet. There were still grandchildren to watch grow up, still horses to train, still quiet moments with Owen to savor. There was still life to be lived, and Grace intended to embrace every moment of it with the same determination that had carried her from that hiring post to this porch, from desperation to abundance, from loneliness to love. She reached over and took Owen's hand, and he squeezed back, a gesture so familiar it was like breathing. Together they watched the stars and planned for tomorrow and gave thanks for all the yesterdays that had brought them here. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything.